The Mafia. Who they really are, and what they did during World War II. They're one of the most feared and ruthless organizations in the world. Their reach is vast, and their power is immeasurable. But what if I told you that the Mafia actually helped to win World War II? Well, it's true. And today, we are going to be exploring the hidden truth behind the Mafia's role in one of the most important conflicts in history. The Mafia had been making money for years by growing and smuggling things like opium and hashish. But with the war raging on, there was a lot more money to be made. But what exactly did they do? The Mafia's involvement in World War II was widespread and varied. One of the most important things that they did was provide intelligence to the Allies. This included information about German troop movements, as well as the locations of important military targets. This was a major turning point in the war, and it is believed that without the Mafia's help, it wouldn't have been possible. The Mafia launched a major offensive against the fascists, which included assassinating key figures and sabotaging their operations. The battle was fought over several days and resulted in the capture of Cefalù by the Allies. This was a major turning point in the war, and it effectively ended fascist rule in Sicily. After all, they were a criminal organization, and yet they were able to work alongside some of the most powerful armies in the world. The answer is that the Allies were willing to overlook the Mafia's criminal activities in order to get their help. They knew that the Mafia was powerful and could be useful, so they were willing to make a deal with them. They were still careful, of course, but they were able to make a lot of money by working in construction and other industries. The government began to crack down on the Mafia again, and this led to a number of high-profile trials. These trials resulted in a lot of convictions, and it dealt a major blow to the Mafia. However, the Mafia was once again able to regroup and survive. They continued to traffic drugs and commit other crimes, but they were much more careful about it. They also continued to traffic drugs and commit other crimes. But it was their involvement in labor racketeering that really made them a lot of money. The Mafia was able to get their hands on a lot of power by controlling unions, and they used this power to extort money from businesses. In addition, the Allies didn't really have any other options. The Italian people were largely opposed to the war, and the Allies couldn't rely on the Italian government for help, so they had to turn to the Mafia. They are still involved in a lot of criminal activity, but it's much harder to prosecute them because they are so careful. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new. The Mafia has survived for centuries, and it looks like they will continue to survive for many more years to come. This helped to weaken the fascist regime, and eventually led to the island being liberated. Don Vito Corleone was the head of the family during World War II, and he played a key role in helping the Allies. His son Santino was killed in action while fighting against the fascists. And this only made Don Vito more determined to help the Allied cause. After the war ended, the Mafia went back to doing what they had been doing for centuries: racketeering, gambling, and drug trafficking. However, they were now working in a different environment. The United States had emerged from the war as a superpower, and it was now seen as the leader of the free world. This meant that the Mafia could no longer operate openly in Italy. They had to go underground and become more secretive than ever before. He was able to use his vast wealth and power to great effect, and he became one of the most important figures in the Sicilian Mafia. The Allies were able to use this intelligence to plan their attacks, and it's believed that it saved many lives. One of the most famous was the Battle of the Golden Triangle. This was a 3-day battle that took place in July 1943 and involved hundreds of Mafia fighters. They had seen what the Mafia was capable of during the war, and they were going to let them get away with it. This led to a series of raids and arrests that effectively crippled the Mafia in Italy. However, the Mafia was able to survive because of their connections in America. Many Mafia families had been living in America for years, and they were able to flee to the U.S. when the raids began. The battle was part of the larger Allied invasion of Sicily, and it resulted in a decisive victory for the Mafia and the Allies. The Mafia could get their hands on some of the vast wealth that was being moved around during the conflict. This included Allied soldiers who were behind enemy lines, as well as Italian civilians who were trying to escape the war-torn country. This was especially important in the early years of the war, when Italy was still under fascist control. The Allies were able to use these supplies to sustain their soldiers, and it helped them to keep fighting even when times were tough. The Mafia had a vast network of contacts throughout Italy, and they used it to move people around the country undetected. They also provided safe houses where people could hide while they were being smuggled. They also stood to gain a lot of power by helping the Allies win the war. If the Allies were victorious, then they would need the help of the Mafia to control the criminal underworld of Italy. So, it was in their best interest to switch sides and help out. From their humble beginnings in Italy to their rise to power in America, the Mafia has always been shrouded in mystery and intrigue. But during World War II, they became key players on the world stage. When Mussolini and his fascist party came to power, they quickly began to crack down on organized crime. This included the Mafia, who had been operating in Sicily for centuries. But when the war began and the Allies started bombing Italy, things changed. The Mafia saw an opportunity to make a lot of money by helping the Allies, and so they switched sides. But why did they do it? What was it that made them decide to join the fight? Let's take a closer look at this fascinating topic. They didn't like the way that the government was treating them, and they saw the war as an opportunity to get back at them. In addition, the Mafia had long been involved in politics, and they didn't want to see Italy fall into the hands of the communists. So they decided to throw their weight behind the fascists and help them win the war. It all started with Italy's entry into World War II. One of the main reasons for this switch was money. But it wasn't just about money and power. Many members of the Mafia were actually sympathetic to the fascist cause. No matter what the motivations were, the fact remained that the Mafia had switched sides and was now helping the Allies. In addition to providing intelligence, the Mafia also helped to smuggle people into and out of Italy. Another important thing that the Mafia did was help to supply the Allies with food and other supplies. But perhaps the most important thing that the Mafia did was to help to liberate Sicily from the fascists. There were several battles between the Mafia and the fascists that took place in Sicily during World War II. Another important battle was the Battle of Cefalù. This battle took place in August 1943 and was one of the last major engagements between the Mafia and the fascists. Of course, no story of the Mafia would be complete without mentioning the Corleone family. Now, you might be wondering how the Mafia got away with all of this. So what happened to the Mafia after the war? In addition, the US government was now more determined than ever to crack down on the Mafia. In America, the Mafia was able to operate more openly than they had been able to in Italy. The Mafia's involvement in labor racketeering eventually led to them being targeted by the US government. Today, Mafia is more secretive than ever before. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave us a thumbs up.